Happy to see all of you here tonight. I'm Sue Jandernoa. I am chair of the board of Grand Valley State University trustees, and I am pleased to be able to welcome you here tonight. One of my roles on the board has been the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, and my subcommittee has been charter schools. So I've been, for the last 4 years, getting to know the charter school system with regards to Grand Valley, and it's been a pleasure. As an elementary school teacher for 30 years, I am particularly proud of how GVSU engages communities to invest in public education for kids throughout Michigan. One way that we do this is training great teachers in our College of Education and Community Innovation. Another way is through our charter school initiative. This dual approach is to improve public education, makes Grand Valley unique, and provides us with the ability to impact elementary and secondary schools that very few institutions have. This year, GVSU authorizes 80 public schools throughout Michigan that serve approximately 36,000 students in kindergarten through 12th grade. Our portfolio is comprised of some of the most diverse and innovative public schools in Michigan. These schools historically educate underserved student populations. Approximately 75% of students in GVSU chartered schools identify as minorities, and approximately 66% qualify for free or reduced lunch. The portfolio includes some flagship networks like the University Preparatory Academies in Detroit and New Paradigm for Education. And I'm so pleased that the leaders of these networks are joining us as guests on our panel tonight. I'm delighted to share that this year approximately 220 alumni of GVS charter high schools are continuing their education at GVSU. Some of those alumni are, give them a hand. There are some here tonight. Thank you. There are some here tonight, so we're very honored that they would choose to be with us. Now I would like to welcome charter school alumnus Joshua May to the stage to introduce tonight's featured speaker.
Good evening. My name is Josh May. Thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate 30 years of charter schools in the United States. First, a little about my own experience here at Charter Public Schools. I'm a 2022 graduate of Grand River Preparatory Academy, which is a charter school in Kentwood, Michigan that is authorized through Grand Valley State University. I'm also a 2018 graduate of Vanguard Charter Academy, which is also a charter school in Wyoming, Michigan. I have to specify that it's in Michigan a lot more often than you guys think. And is also authorized through Grand Valley State University. At Grand River Prep and Vanguard, I was pushed to work hard, and my teachers helped me find what I cared about the most. Even though I'm no longer a student, I still help Grand River Prep with their drama program and their freshman orientation, which they have dubbed Freshman-a-Palooza, because why can't school be fun? I'm here tonight to introduce former Minnesota State Senator Ember Reichgott Junge, whose work 3 decades ago has led to more than 12 million students in the United States receiving an education from a charter public school. Ember's leadership as a Democratic state senator in Minnesota launched the movement that led to the first and many more charter schools being opened in the country. Ember is the author of Minnesota's 1991 First in Nation Charter School Law, a member of the National Charter Schools Hall of Fame, and the founding board member of a Minnesota charter school. She is also the co-founder of the National Charter Schools Founders Library. 10 years ago, in honor of the 20th anniversary of charter schools, she wrote her award-winning candid historical memoir, Zero Chance of Passage, the pioneering charter school story. She is an international spokesperson for charter schools, including presentations on messaging, advocacy, origins, and board governance in 34 states, Guam, Canada, and India. She is the board vice chair of the Maryland-based Charter Schools Development Corporation, CSDC, which is the co-publisher of Zero Chance of Passage. A nonprofit attorney, Ember is also a broadcast political commentator, competitive ballroom dancer, and co-founder of the nonprofit that brings dancing classrooms of Mad Hot Balloons fame to Minnesota 5th and 8th graders. Please join me in welcoming Ember to the stage tonight.
Hello. So Josh, you told me earlier that you want to major in English, drama, or environmental science. I'm still trying to figure out how that all goes together, but I think I figured it out. Because you told me a story that when you were at an NHA school and Jase Bolger came by, that you were called upon to give him a 5-minute presentation, spellbinding presentation on fish eggs. And you did it well. So I think you've got a future in all of your careers. So thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Josh. I appreciate it. And thank you so much to all of you for coming, because I know some of you have traveled far from Detroit. I know that others of you have come through the rain, and so I really do appreciate you being here to celebrate this. And I'm here really for two big reasons that I feel so strongly about. And the first is that we are celebrating something that Michigan has that really very few other states have, and that is a very robust higher education authorizing program. Grand Valley and others in this state have made that a success. And you know what? We don't have that in Minnesota. So I really wanted to come to see it for myself. And I have been able to see that, and I am amazed at what Grand Valley is doing. Chairwoman, trustee, I just think it has been amazing what you have done, not only at the higher education level, but then having the students in the charter schools authorized by you all coming through and working as a collaboration. It's awesome. So I really wanted to see that. And the second reason that I came by is because I'm actually a native of Detroit. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. Now, I left it when I was in kindergarten, but still, I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan. So I never forgot that. I wanted to thank a few people before I get started here. First of all, the most important person in setting all of this up was Don Cooper. Thank you, Don, for an amazing job. Thank you. I've also had the pleasure of working with Rob Kimball. I've worked, of course, with Chairwoman Jander Noah. Thank you so much for that and those kind opening remarks. I also want to thank Jim Gunner, who is here with the National Charter Schools Institute, which has brought me here with the National Charter Schools Founders Library. So all of that is just so appreciated. So I want to go on now into the presentation here. We're going to have a few minutes at the beginning, and then we're going to call up our wonderful panel. I'll start with the national story, and then we'll go on from there. I was the founding board chair of a charter school. It was the most difficult job I've ever done. I really appreciate what all of you have done and are doing, both in supporting charters and in running them. I do know that this is about a daily occurrence. I had a wonderful tour this morning. I couldn't tell that anything was awry. All I could see was just wonderful, smooth, lovely kids at New Branch's Charter Academy. This was not evident, but I do know how difficult it is. The reward that you get in this work is this: education is the movement from darkness to light. That is a mural that was done by the students of a middle school, a Blue Ribbon Middle School in Pembroke Pines, Florida. I love that because I really think that is you as I really look at that. Tonight we want to talk about leadership and transforming a system. Chartering is a system redesign strategy. It is something that will help you in your leadership now as an educator, as an advocate, and as a messenger. And I hope to help you with that tonight, to give you some tools with that. Now, the third reason I came here, besides the fact I was born in Detroit, and besides the fact I wanted to celebrate Grand Valley and the great charter authorizing work, is because it is 30 years ago last month, that the first charter school opened in Minnesota, City Academy. So that's what we're really celebrating today, a movement that has grown from that one charter school. As was noted in Josh's remarks, my book, Zero Chance of Passage, we're going to highlight the story tonight from that book. And when I asked the person in the House of Representatives who was the person who authored the bill with me in Minnesota, I gave her the bill, and I asked her, so what did you think when I gave you this charter school bill? And she responded to me, I had zero confidence it would pass. And that's where the title of this book came from. Now, just to get a sense of the history of this and how young chartering is, this gentleman, Nathan, who's from Toledo, Ohio, and I was speaking to his professional development group, and he told me that he was born in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1991, which was 5 months before the bill passed. Now, this picture was taken 5 years ago, but you add 5 years to him, and that's how old charter schools are. It gives you a sense we're still very young adults. It came about because ordinary people like you and me took an extraordinary stand for change. And now today we have chartering in 45 states around the country. And here's some of the data. Over 3.4 million students right now, 7,700 charter schools, 1 million names on waiting lists. And you know what? In New York City, there are more names on waiting lists than there are seats in charter public schools. That's how many teachers there are, over 205,000, and 440 million in federal CSP funds. There's a bit of a risk on those funds right now. You probably are aware of that. We're still trying to at least maintain them, if not increase them. Now, Michigan chartering today, I find this really interesting. Over 150,000 students in nearly 300 charter schools. You've surpassed Minnesota. We only have about 180 charter schools. About 10% of your students. That's a pretty awesome number. And Grand Valley, as we already heard from the Madam Chair, 36,000 students, 80 charter publics. But here's something she didn't say, which I really thought was great. You have more students in GVSU charter schools than you do in the university itself. Just imagine how many lives you are impacting. I just think that's amazing. Here's some other data real quickly from the National Charter Schools Alliance, and that is the demographics. Mainly urban students, about 60% are urban in charter schools, like Detroit. Some suburban, need more rural, for sure. Demographics, students of color, nearly 70% students of color, nearly 60% low income. And I love this piece about the larger percentage of charter teachers of color. Charter school black student is 35 times more likely to have a black teacher. Now let's go to the Minnesota story. It starts there, and that was when I was 12. The guy behind me is Governor Rudy Perpich. You won't hear his name very much in chartering, but what he proposed was something called open enrollment, where students could go to any kind of public school, not necessarily in their neighborhood, but could go to any other open public school. He proposed it to a firestorm of protest, but it passed a few years later. And it was that initiative that opened the door to chartering, because once we had more access to choices, the question was, what if all the choices were the same? And so we needed more choices to access, and we needed to have them in our neighborhood rather than going across town on a bus. And that's really the third leg there that came in for chartering. Now, he was the first visionary. The second visionary here, believe it or not, was Al Shanker. Al Shanker, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. That might surprise you. But when open enrollment passed, he came to Minnesota and said, I have an idea. My idea is called charter schools. That's where I first heard about it was from Al Shanker. His idea was to help teachers become more professional, to become the leaders that they are, to give them that authority, that autonomy to do what they do best in the classroom, right? And so he really talked about that idea of helping support teachers. And what he said was, it's so true, he said the problem was that the school districts could take their customers for granted because they couldn't go anywhere else. So what would motivate change? All right. The third visionary, if you will, was something called the Citizens League, which was a committee made up of educators, labor leaders, civic leaders, business leaders, and they came together to figure out how we could improve public education. The report Nation at Risk had come out. There were some definite issues that we needed to address. And sometimes we have to, as public officials, step back and remove the barriers and let citizens take the lead. And that's what that chartering idea was all about. And the committee presented it. So chartering came from outside the system. So why chartering? To open up the K-12 education system by allowing groups other than local school districts to provide public education. And the key was to create choices outside the current system to make the system more responsive. Now, Al Shanker kind of diverged from us there because his idea was to offer these small schools within a school within the district collective bargaining agreement. And we decided that that wouldn't always work. It wouldn't allow for that kind of autonomy. So, what is chartering? I love what Ted Coldery says. He is the intellectual person behind chartering. Many of you have probably met him or heard of him. It's a system redesign strategy that allows innovation to happen. Chartering is not a school. It's a strategy. It's a law that allows innovation to happen. It allows the door to open so that you can create new innovation. Innovation is letting people try things. It creates a space where different can be tried. In New Branches this morning, an environmental school, is amazing what they're doing. Very, very innovative. And as I said this morning, if you've seen one charter school, you've seen one charter school. And that's what I love about chartering and the opportunity. So the chartering strategy allows schools to be created new. Chartering is not a school. That's one of the biggest things we have to help the public understand. And the charter school bargain is just simply this. As you all really know, in return for independence, charter school leaders commit to accountability in their performance contract. They must live up to their commitments, or they can be closed. So what I like to say is charter schools trade regulation for results and bureaucracy for accountability. So let's go back to the Minnesota story. Let's set the stage. It's been 3 years. We've been trying to get this charter school law passed. It's now 1991. Here's the stage. We have DFL majorities in both of our houses. That's Democratic, Farmer, Labor. Teacher unions are very strong in Minnesota. That's labor. They did not like chartering. Down here, and I see chairs kind of cover this up, the school boards were not all that excited about this. And we had a Republican governor who had just been elected who wasn't very excited about this at all. Why? Because he had been endorsed by the teachers union. Why? Because Rudy Perpich had proposed open enrollment. So Arnie Carlson was now the governor and a Republican governor. But that was the climate where I came into the picture. In the key vote, when it came up for a vote in the House of Representatives, it passed only by 3 votes. It came very, very close. But it was a very difficult journey for me personally. And the reason it was so difficult is because my friends were union folks. As Josh said, I was a Democrat. I was endorsed by union. And the president of the teachers union was my constituent. She had knocked on doors for me. And the lobbyist for the teachers union was my 9th grade math teacher. So it was pretty close, and it was hard to break away from my union friends. It passed really for two reasons. One, very bipartisan, and that's one of my messages around the country. It's bipartisan. It's so bipartisan I reversed the colors, because here's what happened. 56% of the minority Republicans voted for it. 42% of the majority Democrats voted for it, and it passed. What happened? That doesn't happen today, does it? But here's what happened. This guy right here, Speaker Vanasek, was the sort of hero, secret hero here. But the final vote and the key vote on this was coming up in the House of Representatives. The debate had not been going well, and I was watching this in my Senate office on television. And all of a sudden, you know, he took the vote, and he didn't let it stay open very long, and all of a sudden he took his gavel and he pounded it on the desk, and he said, "The secretary will close the roll." And I looked up, and it passed by those 3 votes. Well, I didn't realize till 20 years later, when I interviewed the speaker, what happened. And what happened was, he's the only one who knows the cumulative total of the votes as they're happening. He can close the roll anytime he wants. He chose to close it when they were 3 votes ahead. Very good. The interesting thing that I didn't realize is that 10 members did not vote. All of them were Democrats. Now, some people have said, well, that's unethical. They should have voted. No, they did not wish to vote. And so they stayed off the board, and that is how chartering passed by 3 votes. Now, the other reason that it passed, I think, is because it had been severely compromised. But you have to understand, I was absolutely devastated when that happened. The compromise was, instead of having both school districts be authorizers, or the State Board of Education, one or the other, so there was a backup or an alternative, they decided in conference committee to have them both be authorizers at the same time. So in other words, you had to have both the school district and the State Board of Education. And so it just was pretty clear to me, we'd never have a charter school. It just never would. Well, I found out pretty soon after that compromise was not defeat. I went home, and I really was in tears. I thought after 3 years, our work had not produced anything. So I was pretty surprised when I heard just the next day that our Republican U.S. Senator, Dave Durenberger, was on the Senate floor lauding the passage of this new pragmatic public school choice in Minnesota, this bill that I thought was going to do nothing. And then, a few days later, came this letter from the guy over there, who was then governor of Arkansas, but also was the head of the Democratic Leadership Council, who also was lauding the passage of this bipartisan, pragmatic bill that was in many ways a compromise, if you will, down the middle between what was happening from President George H.W. Bush, who wanted to have private school vouchers, and the status quo, which was the House Democrats, who only wanted to give more money. So coming right down the middle, that's how chartering passed in Minnesota, and that's how it went on the national scene. So all of a sudden, this bill was getting national attention well beyond any expectation I might have. But back in Minnesota, we got this problem. We got the fox guarding the chickens. Meanwhile, you still have the school districts in charge, and they weren't letting them through the gate. And so the first 7 of 9 applications for chartering in Minnesota did not make it through the gate. And the only two that did were, first of all, a school for students who were deaf, so it was a special needs school. And the second was City Academy, where President Clinton came to visit in the year 2000. And City Academy, of course, was a school the first school that had served students who had dropped out of the system. So it was less competitive, if you will, for the St. Paul School District to authorize. Now, that authorizing issue became clear then to the Minnesota legislature that we had to do something. We had to get an alternate authorizer. So 2 years later, we had the evidence to go back to say we need to get at least an appeal to the State Board of Education, and we did that. Now, in Michigan, meanwhile, so 93, that's where we are in Minnesota now, here we're now in Michigan. Meanwhile, Governor John Engler here has proposed charter schools to the legislature, and your state became the 9th to enact a charter school law. But there's a lot of significance to what Michigan did. First of all, Governor Engler was a governor proposing this. We were kind of bringing it in from the legislative side, and that isn't nearly as powerful as a governor. The second thing is he was a Republican, and ironically, the key leaders in 3 of the states prior, myself, Colorado, and California, had been Democrats. So now we had a Republican. So it's clearly bipartisan. Now, the other thing that's really cool about Michigan, and I've always been grateful for, is that it was the first state to pass the chartering law to allow higher education institutions to authorize. We did not have that in Minnesota. We then followed it later, allowing higher ed institutions to authorize, as well as nonprofits. But we have never done it as well as Grand Valley or CMU or the Michigan model that you have created. And for that, I have always been grateful. Now, what's come out of this authorizing? We now have a number of authorizers in Minnesota, but the very favorite one for me is the one that happened in 2011 when the same union leaders who opposed me viciously in the passage of this decided that they needed a little more autonomy in the Minneapolis district schools, so they initiated the first union-initiated charter school authorizer in the country, and they now authorize 28 charter public schools, many of which are teacher-powered, which is a wonderful innovation that has resulted in empowerment for teachers. So, charter educators lead. I'm going to talk about leadership. How can they lead in education? You did that in the pandemic, and I am so grateful because so many charter schools stayed open. You were flexible. You were responsive. Look at the polling that came out of that now. You know, it's interesting. Parents are figuring out that education is not easy, right? And so now the satisfaction with schools has gone down considerably after the pandemic, 28% post-pandemic, coming down from 50%. But the beautiful part of this, given what Frank Luntz, the pollster, has found, is that 66% of parents agree that we need to focus on rethinking how we educate students. So this is a huge opportunity for us to take chartering forward. Educators lead these ways also innovatively. We always talked about innovation as part of the core value of chartering, and teacher-powered schools is one that has really emerged, not just in Minnesota, around the country. That's where the teachers lead the school without having an administrative layer. Personalized, child-centered learning. The concept of accountability for performance and closure has now moved to some mainstream schools, thanks to chartering. And data now is used in many more ways other than just to evaluate teachers, but to inform instruction and share best practices and change bad practices. So all of these have come about from chartering. And the best thing, I think, is that we've really demonstrated success that can occur for all students, particularly since we have 70% of students of color. And this one is one of my favorites, the Friendship Academy for the Arts in Minneapolis. It's just 2 miles from my home in downtown Minneapolis. It was a National Blue Ribbon School of Excellence, 98% African American, and 1 mile from George Floyd Square. So these are the students that are going to lead that neighborhood, lead our city in the future, and they're getting such a great education. I don't think you can see it on the bottom there, but another graduate of a charter school in Minnesota is Darnella Frazier. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner. She's a graduate of a charter school and was 17 years old when she filmed the murder of George Floyd. Nina Reese, CEO of the National Alliance, is saying basically this: people are taking notice, we must seize the moment, elevate our work, and expand our reach. The time is now. So we need to lead and continue to lead as educators, as you are doing. But we also need to lead as advocates and challenge those crazy myths, because they are the same myths that I dealt with 30 years ago. They haven't changed. So a lot of this is still there, and messaging is going to be key. So the myth there, charter schools get more money than other public schools. The fact is, nationally, they get 30% less Why? They don't get property tax revenue. You've probably experienced that. Some states, like Minnesota, have enacted lease aid to help with facilities payments. Another myth, charter schools take money from district schools. Anybody ever heard that? Just raise your hand. Yeah, okay, sure, you bet. Well, I don't have to tell you, money follows the student. But what you have to do sometimes is translate that for others who don't quite get that. So what I usually say is, okay, my child goes from the Minneapolis district to the St. Paul district. Money follows the student, right? Yeah, for sure. Okay, my child goes from the Minneapolis school district to the Friendship Public Charter School 2 miles away. Money follows the student, right? Oh, I don't know. They can't answer that question. Of course, it's a public school, right? And so that goes to this next myth, which is that charter schools are private schools. There's a huge misconception about that out there. And the fact is that charter schools are public schools. You know that. But here's the thing, that sometimes we are the ones that actually force that language problem. And it is actually interesting because a couple years ago I was hearing on NPR, National Public Radio, and the story was going something like, in Detroit, I remember it said, in Detroit, the public schools opened and the charter schools opened. What does that say? What does that say about charter schools? They're not public. That's what it says. So we need to message that. Even in my discussions today, I've had the most wonderful discussions with people here. But even that, even among charter leaders, I hear that. Well, the public schools do this. They are the district public schools or the traditional public schools as opposed to the charter public schools. So if there's anything you take away from this crazy presentation that I'm trying to do today is charter public schools and district public schools. I talked with a professional development group of teachers a couple years ago, and one of them came back to me and said, she went to her parents that they were enrolling, and they said, we're a charter public school. And the parents said, what? They had no idea. And so it's an opportunity to open that conversation by saying charter public schools, and then that really helps for people to just talk about it, have a conversation. All right, a few other myths real quickly here. Charter schools don't perform, I'm sure you've heard that. Well, here's just a couple of things that I've seen over the years that I think are very helpful. Charter students from low-income families graduate from college at much higher rates than peers in their nearby district schools. And the closer a charter school is located to a district school, the better the traditional students perform academically. It's like chartering raises all boats. Now, there is this issue about for-profit management companies that they own charter schools and take public money. We don't have a lot of this in Minnesota, but certainly we do here. And so my response is, and always has been as a nonprofit trainer, is that charter schools are governed by nonprofit boards of directors that choose the management company. They make the decision to hire, they make the decision to let that management company go if they're not performing. And it's all about the structure of that school. There's no owning a charter school. And it is interesting that in the nation today, about 61% are independent charter schools, mainly as was the intent in Minnesota. But we've been able over time to get good quality results from nonprofit networks and also from for-profit networks. So as far as I'm concerned, it's all about results. It's all about what works for the kids. And my hope is that we can continue to have those things that make a difference. Okay, let's talk about leadership as a messenger. And this is, of course, so important, are the messages that resonate with people about chartering. Frank Luntz, the pollster, did a survey a number of years ago, but the messages still resonate today. And this is what he said. 4 things when you talk about chartering that will resonate with the public. First of all, freedom to choose. That's the more conservative message. Then you have equality for every child. That's the more liberal message. Then you have efficient, accountable use of tax dollars. That's a message for everybody. And finally, opportunity. Opportunity is the word that truly resonates, according to Frank Luntz and all the polling that's been done since. And we have this wonderful messaging guide in the National Charter Schools Founders Library that you've heard about. We put together a toolkit for the 30th anniversary, and I urge you to take a look at that because I think you'll find the language in there that I use, that very helpful language for you to adopt. Now, leadership as a messenger means using that language, but it also means being able to tell your story. And a lot of people go very much into detail when they tell their story because they're so passionate about what it is. So what I like to share with people is to create the story of your charter school in 2 minutes or less. And it's usually in 3 parts. Usually you take the name of a student, a real student, and you say, Maria, when she was here, she was behind in reading by 2 years. We worked with her this way and that way, and the result for Maria is she's now leading her class. Whatever that story is, you want to get it down and share it with everybody, parents, enrollment prospects, as well as policymakers and such. Now, I mentioned the Founders Library. It is just my privilege to be a co-founder of this because we very much need to keep the legacy of chartering alive. We want to remember how it came about so that we can inform the future. Why do we have to do that? Because people on the right and the left are all trying to make it something different. And so they're passing laws, they're trying to add things to it, and we need to keep the integrity of chartering alive and preserve it for history. Now, here's something that was kind of interesting is that the founding of the library came about when I finished my book and I had all these documents and I thought, what am I going to do with them? I'm going to send them over to the Minnesota Historical Society. So there they are. I wanted everybody in the world to have access to them. So I went over there when Jim Gunner came to town. We asked them where they were. We looked them up and there they were on the 16th shelf. Now, the problem is you needed a forklift to get them down, and nobody, I'm sure, had even taken a look at these documents. And so all we did in the library to start it was take down the box and digitize it. It cost all of $1,000 to digitize that whole box, and we started the library with that. And since then, we have been taking on oral histories, and I am so thrilled that Jim this morning had the opportunity to do the oral history of Governor Engler. So we are very pleased and grateful for that. The purpose of the library really is to record the history and the legacy and challenge the relentless misuse of language and origins and purposes. And in my view, to create a common conversation that we all can have based on fact so that we can, in fact, have a conversation between district and charter sectors and find ways to collaborate and learn from each other. We're all there for kids. We're all doing great work. You know, we all have great ideas. Let's figure out a way to do that together rather than do it apart. And so creating a fact-based conversation, down there behind the chairs is the website www.charterlibrary.org. And by the way, you can have a copy of this PowerPoint by asking Don for it afterwards. He will have that for you. I will end my comments before we bring up the panel now, just with this story, one of my favorites. I was speaking somewhere after this woman, but she was just so amazing. Her name is Antoinette Tuff. Antoinette was a bookkeeper at an Atlanta district school a number of years ago. And lunchtime came and the receptionist had to go to lunch, so she came in to cover at the front desk. And all of a sudden, a man about 20 years old came in with an AK-47 over his shoulder. There was no one between her and the 800 people in that school except her. That was it, between him and the 800-some people. Well, she had had a lot of difficulty in her life. She knew trauma herself, and she was able to sort of figure out how to talk to that man. And so she did. She talked to him and said, I know you're dealing with stuff. Let's go talk about it. And she got him into a room, somehow managed to get him into a room, and meanwhile, the police were able to come and to help. She saved 800-some people. What she did was lead from her chair. And that's the beautiful thing about chartering. Everybody in that building can really lead from their chair. They all can make that decision. They all can be there. And that's what I love about all of you, is that you're leading from your chair. The PowerPoint is available for you, and I hope that you'll use it and find the tools in the library. And now we get to do something really exciting, and that's we're going to go to more of the Michigan story, and we're going to ask the panelists, not quite yet, to come on up. But the first thing we're going to do is to have our charter school alum introduce them for us. And it is Brianna Coles, is that right? So she's going to come up and introduce our panelists, and then we're going to open it up for questions after we discuss with them for a little while. So thank you. I just end my remarks by saying thank you so much for what you are doing. You are making a difference. You are transforming the lives of students. You're creating new pioneers, and you are making an impact throughout Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you once again for joining us. My name is Brianna Coles, and I am a third-year student at Grand Valley studying human resource management. I also am an alumni from a GVSU authorized charter school, graduating from Crossroads Charter Academy in 2019. I attended Crossroads from 3rd grade through graduation, so you could say that it has taken me through those formative years, helping shape who I am today. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing 4 education innovators who have transformed public education across Michigan. They have graciously joined Ember on stage tonight to share more about their unique experiences supporting kids and families. First, we have Kristin Beltzer. Kristin Beltzer has been closely connected to the charter schools movement in Michigan since its earliest days when she worked on the staff of the then Senate Majority Leader Dick Posthumus, while Posthumus was leading the charge to pass Michigan's charter school bill. Kristin is also the board president for PrepNet Virtual Academy, a public cyber school founded in 2020 to meet the rapidly emerging need for sustainable online education during and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. She currently serves as commissioner for the Michigan Liquor Control Commission and is the CEO and founder of KB Collaborative. She also previously held roles with the Office of Governor Rick Snyder and the Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce. You can often hear from Kristin on her podcast, Connect with KB. Please help me welcome Kristin Beltzer. Next, we have Danielle Jackson. As Chief Executive Officer of Detroit 9090, Danielle Jackson leads one of the largest charter school networks in the state of Michigan, UPrep Schools. Serving just under 5,000 families in the city of Detroit, UPrep is composed of 3 distinct K-12 districts: University Preparatory Academy, UPrep Art and Design, and UPrep Science and Math. As an educator for 20-plus years and a member of the University Prep crew since 2007, Danielle is laser-focused on empowering teams to deliver quality and excellence in education. She is a native Detroiter who has spent her entire career serving children and families in the city of Detroit. Please help me welcome Danielle Jackson. And last but not least, help me introduce Jase Bolger. Jase Bolger currently serves as a commissioner for the Michigan Civil Service Commission, a bipartisan entity appointed by the governor. He is also the president of Tusker Strategies, which specializes in public policy advising. Jase was a member of the Michigan House of Representatives from 2009 to 2014, where he represented Michigan's 63rd Legislative District. He served as Speaker of the House from 2011 to 2014, during which he achieved bipartisan support for numerous education reforms. Under his leadership, Bolger and the House passed bipartisan school choice legislation that gradually lifted the cap on charter schools authorized by universities. This ultimately guaranteed more Michigan students access to cyber and charter public schools. Jase is an alumnus of Western Michigan University and has completed the Rodell Fellowship in Public Leadership at the Aspen Institute. Previously, he also served 2 terms on the Calhoun County Board of Commissioners. Please join me in welcoming Jase Bolger.
Thank you. That's a lot of introduction, and that's because we have a pretty darn impressive panel. So thank you for that and for joining us today. I really want to just allow you folks to start by telling a little more about yourself in the sense of maybe just in 2 minutes or so, what brought you to chartering? Tell me a little bit about your experience. Go ahead, Kristin. And each of you, yes, take your very own microphone. Just press it up. The little button goes up there. Yeah. The speaker knows that. He's held a mic before. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks so much for having me this evening. My name is Kristin Beltzer, and I really came to charters about 2020. It was during the pandemic, and Don Cooper and I had been friends, and I was making the move over to Grand Rapids from the Lansing area, and I had served on the Hazlitt School Board over in mid-Michigan area for 13 years, and PrepNet was starting. It was a virtual school that was going to start because of the pandemic, and Don and I had an opportunity to chat, and he said, would you be interested in being a board member for a new charter school that we're starting? And so I did, and I came on, and I'm currently the board president. There are 5 of us, all with unique backgrounds. We have a parent who is children in the school system, the charters, as well as a former educator. And then we've got several people who are business owners. And so we have had an opportunity to really kind of from the ground up start this new virtual school at a time when it was very critical for not only for the whole country and the world to pivot, but for schools to pivot as well. And so I'm very proud to say that we started with 33 students that first year and have grown in the last 2 years to 2,000 students. And so it really is incredible the amount of work and the team effort that's gone into this.
Obviously, for that kind of growth in a short time. But you did have a pandemic, and the need is so great, so we hope you keep on growing.
Thank you. We do too. You got to manage that growth.
You bet. All right, Danielle, go ahead.
So my story is, it's an interesting road. I was all prepared to start my student teaching experience in the district public school. Had even visited my cooperating teacher, and I happened to be at a picnic with my fiance, and a young man closed his finger in the trunk of his car. And so I kind of figured out who his mother was. So I ran full speed to his mom to get her so that she can come get his finger out of the trunk. Well, longer story shorter, she was one of the founding members of a charter school, and they were hiring teachers. They had not filled all their teaching positions. And so I had an opportunity to do on-the-job student teaching. For those of us in the room who are teachers, that means I got paid instead of doing it free. And honestly, at the time, I really didn't understand how monumental this experience was for me. So I often tell the story that my entire career has been in charter, but it wasn't until I started my graduate program that I started to understand how much misinformation was out in the universe about charter public schools. I remember being in class where professors were literally misleading. I'm like raising my hand like, that's not true. That's not true. And having to decide, do I want to fail the class or do I want to pass the class? Like, what do I want to do here? And so I have had the pleasure of being able to be involved in charter schools. And my personal story is I went to the traditional public school K-8, and my parents had to put me in private school because they just didn't feel that I was going to get a quality education and be in a safe space. And so the only choice that they had was to pay for me to go to school, which we could not afford at the time. And so, you know, coming full circle to it, when I graduated from high school, I remember saying, I want to be part of an educational organization where kids could go to school and get what I got for free. So it really became this serendipitous, I think, the calling on my life to be involved in the charter school movement as really fundamental to choice. I think parents should have the opportunity to choose where they feel their child will be best served, and to be part of that movement my whole career has been
and you're leading now a lot of them.
I'm leading a lot of them. Would not have pictured myself in this role. I often say that, but I follow where the Spirit leads me. And I wanted to have impact. And so I've been blessed to be part of the UPrep Schools organization for quite some time. I have alum that come back to campus and they see me. It feels really good because in this industry now, people turn over fairly quickly. But for the kids to come back and say, hey, Ms. Jackson, you know, you're still here. I'm like, yes, I'm still here because I believe in the work that we're doing. And I think you got to stick and stay if you really want to fulfill the vision of now even hearing the story of how charters began. You got to stick and stay to see results.
So you lead Detroit 9090, right? And all of those schools, which is awesome. But you got to tell me if the little boy got the finger attached.
So yes, the finger was fine. I'm sorry I left the audience hanging, but yes, he was fine, and really stay close to that family. They live in Vegas now, but yes, he was fine. Yeah.
Good. Thank you
Yes.
for that. What a story. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to call you Jase, but I should
Please.
call you by your title, but you know, that's me as a senator, we always do, but you're Jase on this panel because, okay,
Thank you, Senator.
Go ahead.
I'm a Johnny-come-lately. It's been only a decade for me. And when I ran for office, it was 2008. You may remember the state had 15% unemployment. We were in a perpetual budget deficit. There were mid-year budget cuts. When we walked in, when we won the majority in 2011, it was about $1 billion we had to cut from the state budget, just the complete antithesis of what they see today in Lansing. So I came to ran on fiscal issues, the economy. Those were the things I was going to deal with. And this issue came up. We all advance or stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, right? So for me, certainly in Michigan, it was Governor Engler. We did some little things, but he started that here. And to get to be with you, Senator, that he stood on your shoulders and you led. It's just a privilege to get to speak with you. Nice to meet you last night. But the point is, I didn't recognize, I would have to confess, when I came in, the importance of this issue. But it became very real to me, the weight of the responsibility of the kids and the families who would be impacted. I had a little experience, and happy to unpack it later. As a dad, as a charter school came to our town, and I had to make a decision, or my wife and I had to make a decision of where our kids would go, and the things we heard, they came back to me later when I was in the legislature some years later. But the point is that it wasn't what I came to do in Lansing, but it's something I grew to feel an incredible responsibility for, so much so that on the advent, or the night before, we were going to pass the bill, well, I hoped we would pass the bill, to expand and ultimately eliminate the cap on charter schools. It was an artificial limit on opportunity for kids who needed help. They needed those choices. They deserved that chance. And so we were short. When I left the Capitol the day before, we sought to pass it. We kind of set an artificial deadline. It's go or no go. We've been dealing with this long enough. Everybody needs to make up their mind. I went home. We were 20 votes short of passage. Now, in Michigan, it's elected and serving, so I had to hit 56. I couldn't close the board just when enough had voted. We had to get 56 votes based on our rules, and I didn't sleep that night. It's the first issue I lost sleep over because I didn't want to fail. I felt we needed to deliver, and went to the Capitol the next day. A lot of meetings, a lot of arm twisting. I don't know if there were threats made, but ultimately, we did pass the bill that day, and I tell you, it was one of the most gratifying moments that I participated in because it was a team effort. There were a lot of people at play there or who were working there, but to get to carry on something that had been started before us and simply seek to improve it, make it better, pay it forward was really important to us.
You know, the power of a speaker is a lot, but it relies on relationships and your ability to work with your colleagues. And thank you for doing that, because that was huge, I know, for Michigan and chartering here. We talked a little bit in the presentation about charter schools as a strategy. And the idea is to open the door to innovation and different kinds of things. The biggest thing for me was to empower teachers, okay? To empower teachers so that they could do different things in the schools. Have you seen some of that in Michigan in your experience, where teachers have been able to try new and different things?
Go ahead.
Absolutely. I think that, I know in our case in particular, we've sort of, the pendulum has kind of swung in various ways. But I think what's important is for teachers to have a level of autonomy. I think that's what drew educators to charter public schools, is that it sort of promised this new way of being. And I think that whenever you can have teachers at the table, just thinking through how to best, move forward in the classroom, you're gonna get a better product. And so for us, it's about designing curriculum that speaks to what the current issues are, and teachers get really hyped up about different ways to innovate in that way. I know that sometimes school can kind of just look like school, you go from school to school, but I think that the way that the environment is set up, the experience you get when you walk through the doors, there's a sense of community that you get to create. There's a sense of responsiveness I think charters get to address when we see that something's not quite clicking. And so I think the flexibility for charters to pivot when they need to is something that I definitely see across our schools and then other charters within our area.
I absolutely think we've seen that. I would caution, we better be careful not to lose that. So often in the legislative process, you'll hear, let me back up. As a legislator and senator, you probably saw the same thing. Everybody that comes to your office represents an adult who's in the system. It's a 14, at that point, now I think it's a $19 billion a year enterprise, education spending. And my experience was there's nobody that came through the doors advocating for kids. They all advocated for the adults, whether it was the school boards, the administrators, the et cetera, the teachers unions. Everybody had, and I don't blame them, but the nature of that beast is they're all representing adult interests. And so what we heard a lot of is, well, we could do that too if we didn't have to live by those rules. You ought to make the charters have to live by the same rules that we have to live by. They want to choke out the innovation that exists for charters in the name of some supposed fairness. And so that's one caution I would make. The second is charters don't lose that. There are a lot of times that I started to worry that as charters came in, I'd say, boy, you're sounding a lot like the traditional school district now, where it's all about money, where it is all about fairness, where it is all about all those things that you were established to seek to shake up. Don't lose it. I'm not going to bore you with the difficulty I had this afternoon getting my new Apple Watch going. It's not on my wrist. It is going, but it's not on my wrist because it's charging. But I'm going to say, I don't know about you, but present company, the older I get, maybe the less innovative I get. Charters are now 30 years old. You're not old, but don't lose that innovation. Don't become staid. Don't become like me and a little bit challenged at innovation. Keep that freshness, keep that innovation, and keep shaking it up.
And what innovations have we seen in Michigan and or that you'd want to see? Because I know tomorrow I get to see the West Michigan Aviation Academy, and I'm really excited about that, but that's clearly an innovation. Are there some others that you might want to mention?
I really think that maybe part of the innovation is the willingness to think differently and to be more open-minded. And, 30 years ago when this was being put into place, and I went to work for Dick Posthumus, who introduced this legislation, back in the day. I came to work for him not shortly after, and they just kept pushing this opportunity for there to be greater choice, for parents to have choices, and also to push the other district public schools to become better. The competition was so important. And I think in many ways that it has. I don't know that they necessarily can sometimes keep up with charters, but I think it's pushed them a lot. And I think that that's what education needs, that this variety is good. You'll see, and I was talking to Brooke Franklin about this, you know, you have a CVS on a corner and you have a Walgreens across the street. That kind of competition is very, very good. You really should be only competing with yourself.
And what I would add is that we're also seeing industry partners wanting to close the gap between K-12 education and actually going into the place of work. One of the programs I'll highlight is we just started a law program with Ford Motor Company, because there's a desire to get more people of color in law programs. And so bringing law to a high school student and talking about how you can really affect change in your community allows students to develop interest in a career path that maybe that they did not. And so again, it goes back to that pivot of how can we get kids more excited about this long road from K-12 education through post-secondary to the place of work, particularly during the pandemic where we saw high school kids going to work for Amazon. You know, we were literally pulling our kids, like, I need you to get out of the drive-through and get into Zoom, you know. And so we really saw, and we also are seeing a lot of kids with an entrepreneurial spirit. They have sites on Etsy, you know, selling products. So how do you start to bridge this divide between being a 15-year-old, having an idea, and how that translates into a lived experience in the place of work? So we're also, you know, again, going back to that nimbleness, we can respond to what the current state is and create programming that matches the moment.
I love that. And as a lawyer, I love that law school. That's great. But I also today was talking with a number of folks in various areas, and we talked a bit about the teacher-powered schools as an innovation, which is actually something that came out of Minnesota. In talking with several of you, you've not had a lot of experience with that here, but I really hope that you'll take a look at that. And Grand Valley, I love the fact that they're really looking at that, where the teachers lead the school rather than have that administrative layer. And it really allows that autonomy, that ability to do something new and different. But in my view, it brings everybody together because you can have teacher-powered schools in districts as well as in charters. And so it kind of brings us together as two sectors in ways that we can share best practices. So something that I really applaud Grand Valley for and hope that you'll be involved or look at that. But let's move now to families and students. Okay. And what impact, what has chartering brought to the students and families of Michigan? And how have they responded?
Well, I'll share. When I went to the second school that I was teaching for after I started my teaching career, I just remember during open enrollment watching so many parents filling out, because back then there was still a lot of pen and paper. And so watching them fill out all of this paperwork year after year, and I started to get curious about what were we really doing? You know, this idea of empowering families to be able to take an interest, because it used to be a time when you just went to whatever the school that was up the street or that was near you from a geographical location, and all of a sudden now parents are consumers of education and they have agency in education. And what I'm seeing, particularly coming out of the pandemic, is that parents are engaging in the educational enterprise in a much more robust way. You know, when I was an undergrad, I worked in nonprofits, so I worked with over 100 families and I taught parenting. I didn't have kids of my own, that's a little side joke, but I taught parenting in the field. I never met a parent that did not want what was best for their kids. But I met a lot of parents who did not have did not have a great educational experience, did not feel comfortable walking into the schoolhouse because they felt like they would be belittled or not taken seriously. And that ability to engage was just different once charter schools began to open. And I think they still do. They make decisions to remove their child from a place that they feel like their needs are not being met. And they're willing to work with you if you're willing to work with them. But there's a lot more active engagement because I choose every day to send my child to your school, or I choose not to.
Absolutely. I think that empowerment, that agency, and also that competition. Kind of what was mentioned earlier, rising tide. And it's one thing to talk about that in theory. I could throw you a lot of numbers. You know, Arizona's experience that all kids perform better when all kids have more options. That includes those kids who choose to remain in the traditional public school. But let me talk about my own family's experience. I mentioned I had experience when our kids were young with a charter school coming to our community. And what did we hear? We heard all the things I heard later in Lansing, that the charter school coming would rob our traditional school. Our traditional school, therefore, would have less money to offer alternatives or electives to our kids, my kids. Very much seeking to scare me that this was going to be a bad thing, and they would never have enough money to offer things like AP courses for our kids. So our finances would be decimated, the kids' services would be hurt. Our kids at that point are in preschool, right about, my recollection is that charter school opened right about the time. So we've got two, our son, our older child, was going into kindergarten. Now, we chose, let's be honest, I said earlier my wife and I had to choose. I just said yes, dear. So my wife chose, and I supported, our kids to stay in the traditional Marshall public schools. 12 years later, I'm in the legislature, and our kids are getting to the point where they're graduating. That gave me, because I was hearing these same arguments, I thought, I'm going to go back and look, because I knew our son had chosen to take all sorts of AP courses. So I went back and looked. When he was entering kindergarten, before the charter existed, there really weren't AP options. There really weren't extracurricular or the alternatives, the electives is the word I'm searching for. There weren't as many of those options. 12 years later, because there was an alternative, because suddenly that local school district had to earn our kids' attendance, our son graduated, went to Miami of Ohio with a semester's worth of credits. He had 15 AP credits because those became a reality. Our daughter, lest you worry about our kids attending quality institutions, came here to Grand Valley and found great success having taken the electives she wanted in our high school. And the school's finances have never been better. They were perpetually in deficit, perpetually in trouble before the charter school came. When my son was graduating from high school, they had a surplus repeatedly. That school my kids attended, the traditional public school, got better because we had a charter school in town.
Kristin, you're on the board of a virtual charter school. Has that been something that parents have been seeking?
Absolutely. I think that there was a lot of uncertainty for everyone when the pandemic hit, and it was very innovative and creative that PrepNet Virtual was established, and NHA and GVSU worked together and came up with this alternative. And I think that that's what's allowed this kind of free thinking, this way to be more innovative. And I think innovation breeds innovation. And that's kind of the neat thing that's been able to happen here with GVSU and NHA in the development of PrepNet is that they're continuously thinking and looking and being visionary about what that next thing is. And, they're very nimble and able to pivot. And we have a micro academy right now where we've had some students come on site. There's a discussion that if we're going to continue to that, does that serve them well? Are we getting enough attendance? And that kind of thing. And so you just have an opportunity within the system and structure to be so much more nimble, I think is the right answer.
I just want to let the audience know that we're going to take some questions and probably another question or two. And so if you have some, you can start formulating them and we'll have someone take your question. Looking ahead in the future, 10 years from now, what would you like to see? Thinking about the kind of school, the climate, the students, the families, what would you want chartering to be able to offer that we aren't doing quite yet?
I think it's providing great leadership. I think that this opportunity for chartering is opening up everyone's eyes, and especially since the pandemic, that parents, you see the statistics, you showed it up on the screen, that more and more people are looking for options, and they want to be more engagement and to be more involved in their children's education. And I think that this allows them to do that. And so in many ways, when you think about the fact that there were lawsuits in the very beginning, Jim and Dan know that better than anybody, but really chartering was ahead of its time from a leadership perspective. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway, is that the people who are involved in charter schools are willing to look down the road and think about what's best for kids and about how to improve all the time.
And maybe they don't know what it is right now, right? But it's the opportunity to look down the road, right, and see that. Yeah, I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would certainly echo that. Every kid is found their niche because that opportunity exists. So whether it is aviation, that's the hook. Whether it's a nature center, that's the hook. Whether it's entrepreneurialism, that's whatever that hook is. Number one. Number two, I think you were absolutely right to call out the innovation for teachers. I think we absolutely need to empower teachers to take charge, to be innovative. I just hated hearing stories of teachers feeling shackled by the rules, the regulations, the restrictions. We want them to be creative. And so if it's via a charter school, that's great. Let's embrace that. But I guess, and you kind of hinted at it, what I hope if I could go forward in 10 years and say, I never thought of that. I hope there's so much innovation that it looks totally different, something I couldn't describe today because I wouldn't imagine it. And it's sprouted up, it's developed, and it is totally different than what we see or feel today, because that's meeting the needs of the kids at that time.
What do we need to do to get there? Do we need more qualified board members? Do we need, and how important is their role?
Well, I'll say, as I was listening to both of their responses, which I would echo that, I think that there needs, it may sound a bit utopian, but if we can get away from the competitive nature between district public schools and charter public schools and really put the child at the center of the work, where you can have a Walgreens on the corner and a CVS on the corner, and it's about getting better for the sake of our children and not market share, I think we will have come a long way. I will say that boards, particularly if you're blessed to have a diverse board, really helps you in the space of advocacy. Also with mentorship, when you have folks, I'm blessed to have a really wonderful board, a supportive board, to help guide you through some of the policy that's out there, joining forces for lobbying and things of that sort, so that we can continue to push the policy forward. Because I think, as a former teacher myself, there's a lot of pressure with the assessment and accountability systems that are out there that makes it a very scary place to be innovative. Because, you feel like you've got to get that A, and if you don't get the A, then, who cares about innovation? And so I think there's also opportunities in advocacy work to really examine some of the practices that really detract some of our best talent from coming into the education space to be disruptive. It's not always safe, but I think governing boards can help support in that advocacy and policy work as well.
Yeah, I want to say get out of the way, meaning for policymakers, for regulators. Get out of the way. I know one of the most disappointing experiences I had was, again, go back, paint the picture. It's 2009. Our budget is a mess. Every meeting you go to, they want more money. It's not there. I can't give you more money, but can I lift a burden for you? Because I'm hearing stories of all these regulations that prevent our teachers from being innovative, and the administrators have to do this report and that report, and it all goes up to the Department of Education, and they're positive nobody reads it. I absolutely believe that. So give me a list. Give me a list of the things that we can repeal, that we can get out of your way. I never got any such list from our local traditional school district. Never got such ideas. And so whether it's charters, and absolutely to make charters success, we've got to have engaged, active, talented board members willing to show up as many times the most important criteria. But I also hope we will get out of the way and let that innovation happen across our various types of education.
Are you feeling the sense that regulation is coming down too far, too fast?
Yeah, and I'm worried that there's so much money, there's no pressure to have any innovation. There's just a different world today than existed when I was there. It just is what it is, a combination of federal money and the receipts of the state government. Despite the fact that we all went through a pandemic, those receipts are way up because of what's happened to the inflation of spending. And so I fear that we're fat and happy, that with all that money, we're not feeling any pressure to really strive and get better. I think they're absolutely right that we want quality. We all want quality. And maybe another factor in Michigan, we've got term limits. It's very short. Everybody wants to do something. And we all see frankly, our education performance is abysmal. And so we want to do something. Well, then we pass another attempt at quality measure, and of course, we've got to pause and say, are we making matters worse? Are we, by attempting to get better quality, are we standing in the way of better teaching?
Danielle, you had one thing, and then we'll turn over to the audience, that I wanted to just go back and talk about more among the panel, and Kristin, you might have something on this too. The tension right now between the district sector and the charter sector, particularly in Detroit, but all over, all over. What can we do about that?
Do a lot of praying. I think that if just long enough put children at the center of the work, it's possible. I think it's about getting in the same rooms with each other, realizing like, oh, I touch you, you actually are a human being, and like, oh, we have a lot in common. We really do want great things for kids. They're not our property. They're our responsibility, though. I think if we can continue to do that, it's not easy, but if we just get in the room, have the critical conversations. And I have to just say, it is fueled a lot in politics. I've seen that throughout my career. There's just this fear. I think the charter public schools has taken heat for disrupting things like unions and things of that sort that wasn't really, as you so eloquently presented today, wasn't the impetus for the legislation. It was really about bringing quality opportunities to families. And so, I think it's going to take a lot of work, but hopefully, maybe in Detroit we might be an example of what's possible.
So Michael is over there. He's got a microphone, and we're going to look to the audience to see who might have a question. We have a gentleman here in the middle.
I say it looks like we have time for maybe a couple questions here.
Thanks to all of you. Really appreciate it. Ms. Jackson, I have a question for you. You've been a part of this for a long time and obviously successful, but in the last couple of years, you're facing challenges you didn't imagine in 2019, particularly the impact of the pandemic on your kids. And the second is the dramatic change that's happened in the workforce with staffing, and I can't imagine you don't have similar challenges. Can you comment on it and tell us what's working and what's not working in those areas?
Sure, absolutely. I actually was promoted to CEO 60 days before we shut down schools. And so my entire experience as CEO has been managing the crisis of the pandemic. And I think, one, we're in some mental health strife right now. There was a point in time where I was literally, we were a school that we had a virtual year for the 2021 school year. and for the 21-22 school year, and I'm sorry, no, 2021. And I was lobbying quite hard with my leaders to try to get our schools open, but the fear was tremendous. And there was a lot of words like trauma, big T, little t, grace. You know, there was a point where I was like, grace is about to be a bad word. Like, I don't want to hear the word grace again, you know. And then when it was time for us to come back together for 21-22, we all really started to understand the gravity of this pandemic. I was sharing with someone before we started. It's almost like it's been the great examination. We were still enough to begin to question our entire life, not just what we were doing in our work, but our entire life. The divorce rate has, gone crazy. A lot of babies being born. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing with talent is, one, we've got to examine the role of teacher. Is it reasonable to expect teachers to operate at the same level that we were asking them to operate pre-pandemic? You know, there's stories out there about the best teachers are single with no children because they don't have a life after work. They can work long hours. You just chew them up and you spit them out. And I saw this in my career as I went into leadership. Whenever I was confronted with a woman who was having a baby, no gender judgment. I just didn't see this in my male teachers. They understood that they weren't going to be able to be who they were. And they began to question their value. Can I still do this job? And, I'm always asking, like, are you coming back after the baby? When you come back, and I remember saying to them, you've got to lower, and it sounds crazy, but their standards were even higher than mine. And so it's not popular, but we do have to really examine the role of the teacher. And honestly, once your child turns 5, you're like, thank God they can go to school. I don't have to pay for daycare anymore. But we're really forcing this particular industry to be a 5-day-a-week proposition. Imagine what would parents do if they didn't have school as daycare, So there's some real important questions that we have to start asking ourselves, because I don't see the talent issue going away. We're seeing it across all areas of operations. So, day porters, we were competing with McDonald's for the first time to fill our facilities and food service positions. And so we've had to examine our compensation structures. So there's more pressure on the dollar that schools are getting now that wasn't in place before. So I don't have a ton of answers, but what I can tell you is that people are not well. This is a human being business. So you have all these little people with feelings, and then you have all these big people with feelings, and you have feelings. And we're just a country not positioned to deal with mental health well. And so we're trying to figure that out. But there's some important conversations that we need to start thinking about. How are we really creating space for education to be innovative and disruptive in ways that can improve the quality and how we even view what education should or should not look like in the
Big
future.
questions. And chartering is in itself a disruptive innovation, right? That's right. So it just kind of need to have some of that done within it. That's more questions. We have time for maybe one or two more.
One more, if anyone's out there.
Oh, Michael. Please don't be shy. Damn.
Ditto. Appreciate the conversation that you guys have had. Because you've got experience introducing the new law, passing the charter cap, being supportive of Dick Posthumus, et cetera. Danielle, you just described the mental health of school people. We've got some pretty contentious political environment to deal with. So how do we, it isn't just figuring out how to work together with districts, it's figuring out how to deal with the politics and still lead, still be important in those conversations. Any advice on how do we move not just the past history of those political battles, but what's the future look like? How can we be leaders and yet be innovative and creating new strategies and policy? What does that look like in a bipartisan way, Ember?
How much longer do we have? real quick story. Really, as an elected official, it was stunning to me to talk to teachers. We vacationed with teachers who, by the time I was done, wouldn't shake our hands at church anymore. But it got that personal, unfortunately. But when we'd vacation with them, they'd talk about, I want to be paid for the job I do. I want to be, rewarded as a professional. I want to be, there's somebody down the hall that's just mailing it in. And I'm working hard every day, and that's not fair. And so we popped a merit pay bill. I thought they'd treat me as a hero, and they got all sorts of messaging of how I hated them and was after them. And this was all a ruse to get rid of high-paid teachers in favor of younger, cheaper teachers. And the same with tenure reform. We heard the same thing from younger teachers who were coming in and saying, it should be about the job I do, not how long I've been there. So the point is that politics switched, got personal, really turned the issue on its head from what they had told me personally. But what I will say is we can't abdicate that responsibility. We, as the people, can't sit back and say, why are our politicians doing this? They are doing what we're telling them to do. They are doing what we're rewarding them to do. We, the people, get what we ask for, whether we recognize it or not. So we have to show up. We have to vote. We have to be clear with what we want. And we can't wring our hands and say, really, this is the best we got? This is the best that we, the people, put forward and then elected in primaries. So we have to take responsibility individually. I'm going to say I'm out. I hold no position, so I hope you'll let me sit next to you in the audience and say we all need to take responsibility for that and not sit back and expect somebody else to do something we're not doing ourselves.
Kristin, you were in the origins of this with chartering in Michigan. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think that part of this is, and when you talk about being gutsy, and some people remember this better than me, but Senator John Kelly from Detroit was one of the people who stepped up, and he supported this movement under a Republican bill. And he did it for his kids. He was an educator and from Wayne State. And just think, if he had not have done that, I don't know where the bill would have ended up. But the bottom line, he was thinking bigger and about those kids in the city of Detroit and what they needed. And I think if we can all continue to think about the welfare and what's important, and I know that that's kind of pie in the sky, but I can only be responsible for Kristin Beltzer. I can only do what I think is good and try and be honorable about it. But I think if more people did that, you'd find a lot more common ground.
That individual was a Democrat, is that what you're saying?
Correct,
that
yes.
was working with the Republican majority leader that you worked for, right? Yeah, it's all about that bipartisan nature, and that's what we've lost. That is what we've lost, is the bipartisan nature of chartering, and that's what we're working to restore with the library. And I believe that we have a big job to do, but we can do it. And by using the library and the tools, we can help to bring that back to where it was and create the advocacy for the future, again, based on facts and not the misinformation. Danielle, I'll give you the final word. Oh, yeah, you thought I was going to...
Oh, I got it. Wow. Well, first, I just want to say thank you. It's been such a blessing to hear the story of charter and being able to take that back to our community. I consider it an honor to do so. Thank you for, being on this panel, with me. I'll just say, at the end of the day, this is about children, and we just have to do whatever it is that we can from the seat that we sit in to move the work of educating children in places where they're seen, heard, understood, and challenged. And if you can say that you're doing that with all that you have, then that's one more step that we're going to take this ride.
Let's give a big hand for the panel. And thank you all for the time that you spent today to celebrate the 30th anniversary. There's a lot of good things that have been happening over 30 years. There are some challenges, and we need to be ready to meet those. But with people like this and people like you, we can meet them. And I just know that we've got what they say, the best is to come. So thank you all very much.